Hello, this is Dr. Reese. I want to take you to the autumn woods of my home, New England, and follow the story of two strangers falling in love against the backdrop of falling leaves, crackling fires, and cozy nights under the soft blankets. Before we begin, let us take a moment to relax and find comfort in the space that you're in now. As you close your eyes, allow your body to sink into the mattress underneath you. Right now, I invite you to simply just be. You don't have to do anything in this moment except listen to the sound of my voice. Try and imagine yourself by the perfect bonfire. What does it look like? Are you deep within the woods, wrapped in a blanket? Or are you sitting in a penthouse suite, watching the fire crackle against the backdrop of the sparkling city lights? Or are you sitting surrounded by autumn leaves with all your friends and family by your side, listening to the chirp, chirp, chirp of the crickets nearby? Wherever you are, I want you to try and turn your attention to the warm flames of the bonfire. Imagine their color. Are they red, like a juicy, ripe apple? Or are they orange, like a jack-o'-lantern? Use the power of your mind to hear the crackle of the fire. And as you breathe in, imagine the flames growing and growing and growing. Imagine them shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Pay attention to your breath as it goes in and out, in and out. You breathe in warm and comfort, and you exhale all the stress of the day. Now that we've taken some time to relax and find comfort, let's begin our story in the hills of New England. So imagine a New England small town with a big tree on a sea of grass at a park. The locals all drive by it and smile, knowing that was days away. The vibrant reds, browns, and oranges would bloom across the landscape like a spreading fire, igniting everyone with passion about the season. And for Sage, this year was no different. When she awakened on the first real autumn day, there was a change in the air that was blowing in through her open window. The air of summer had disappeared. The scent of lilacs, freshly mowed lawns, flourishing forests, and ripe, sweet strawberries had faded away seemingly overnight. The smells of autumn were in full swing. The air had a bite to it. It was invigorating. Even at this early morning hour, Sage swore she could smell ripe apples growing on the apple trees. She could smell the earthly aroma of leaves hitting the mossy ground. She could smell the spiced cider, the dry warmth of harvested hay, the sweet spice of pumpkin. The world smelled alive in a way it didn't during the summer. It was as if the atmosphere was inviting you to drink some cider. If you wanted to venture out into the woods and explore the splendor of falling leaves, you were welcome to. If you wanted to travel through corn mazes and pick apples under the sunset over the horizon that was ablaze, you were welcome to. And on that first fall morning, Sage decided to do all three. She rose from her bed and wrapped herself in the warmest sweater she could find. She slid on her boots, a necessity for traveling through the soft autumn ground, and she began her trek outside. She took an even deeper breath. She felt as though she was in some fall storybook from her childhood. There was a magic in the air that couldn't quite be found in other seasons. A magic that she welcomed wholeheartedly. Wanting to enjoy the weather, she opted to hop on her old cruiser bike and start the journey down the dirt road, past the farm. All the farmers were busy in the fields, harvesting their crops. The air was rich with aromas of ripe fruits and vegetables, and of the delicious dishes slowly being prepared with them. Sage waved to each farmer as she passed. They all smiled and were happy to see her. Sage had grown up in the small town, a beautiful little town nestled against the mountains and a large lake flanked by the farmland on the outskirts. Sage felt as though she was flying through the autumn air. By the time she arrived at the farm, at the very end of the road, she was full of joyful energy that was contagious to everyone she passed. The farm she arrived at was a staple in the autumn months. Acres and acres of apple trees to pick apples from, and with a dense forest with a nice trail for a nice, colorful nature walk. It was the perfect place to experience autumn in New England, and Sage decided that she'd like to start with the corn maze. She grabbed a map and descended into the maze. All around her, corn stalks rose so high, they seemingly touched the sky. It felt very cozy and exciting all at once. A safe adventure where you could simply explore. Sage loved to travel through the maze without too much of a purpose. For her, it was about being somewhere away from it all. Somewhere where she could stand still with nature and listen to the beautiful sounds. However, Sage wasn't quite expecting what she found around the corner in the center of the maze. For quite some time, she had been wandering through the rows of corn by herself, only hearing the sounds of children giggling behind the stalks. But as she rounded the corner, she walked directly into someone standing in the middle of the aisle. She apologized profusely to the man, and when she finally looked up and caught his eye, her heart she could get trapped. His smile was equally warm and not forced. He extended his hand to her to help her get more steady on her feet. The man's name was Travis. Even in the moment of surprise, there was still a spark in her light green eyes, which shimmered and shined like a forest floor after a gentle rainfall. Travis spoke. "I'm the one who doesn't know where I'm going," he said. Only then did Sage look a little more inquisitive at Travis. He wasn't dressed like a local. His hair fell in curls around wire-rimmed glasses, and slung around his neck was a camera. Sage invited him to join her. She couldn't just leave the tourists to be lost in the maze, right? Travis chuckled at her little dig and gestured toward the maze. Travis chuckled at her and agreed. As they walked, Sage learned more about Travis. He had worked for several companies as a photographer. However, the commercial life just wasn't meant for him. Travis sold everything he owned and hit the road to photograph the country over the course of a 2-year trip. A 2-year trip that he was almost certain would be extended. He wasn't exactly sure what the future held, mainly because he simply liked too many places. He had given it all up to search for something, and clearly it was in search of something he wasn't even expecting. For now, he was just chasing sunsets across the country, stopping wherever his heart desired and trying to sink into each and every community. He asked Sage about her life. How had she ended up in this town? Sage's story was much different than Travis's. Sage grew up in this town. She was born and raised here. She played in the creeks and streams on warm summer days as a child. She sledded down the icy hills and skated on the sleek ponds as a teenager. She studied in the old stone library that was nestled at the foot of the mountain. Ancient oak and maple-lined streets that laced through neighborhoods full of Victorian houses. Rather than going to college, she too had set out into the world without a plan. She decided to travel around the country as well, stopping wherever her heart desired, embarking on whatever adventures came to her that day. And when she was done, she wanted to come home. She missed the smell of the woods. She missed the bubbling melody of the river. She missed the tang in the air. In fact, she had returned here to write a book of her own. Every morning, she'd bike down and down to the little library, just as she had as a child all those years ago. While most people in town would smile politely at Sage's story, Travis was fully engaged. His eyes lit up as he asked all about her travels and all about her book. Where did the idea come from, he asked. What was your inspiration? The two of them talked for what seemed like an endless amount of time. As they weaved through the rows of corn, it felt as though they were in a world of their own. Their journeys were so similar. And you could hear the swish, swish, swish of swaying in the sweet autumn breeze, and the crunch, crunch, crunch of the earth underneath their feet. Before long, they had found their way out of the maze. When they emerged from their small world into the rolling hills of the farm, it looked more beautiful than ever. They hovered there for a moment, their conversation still flowing, their bodies inching closer together as if the maze has closed in on them. Sage asked him what else he had never experienced in autumn before. Being from a southern city, this was his first time seeing leaves change and being in a corn maze. Without hesitating, Travis invited her to spend more time. "Will you show me around?" he asked. She shook her head yes, with an innocent look on her face. It was more than he ever could have hoped for. Sage kindly took him by the hand and led him to their very first activity. They went off for apple picking. She led him into the far orchard, which was a spectacle in itself. The orchard sat on the hilly part of the farm. The trees stretched far to the horizon in perfectly straight lines over the natural dips and dives and curves of the landscape. Travis took a deep breath of the air as he traveled through the soft, dark, green grass. There was a freshness in the air, a bite to it, as if the world was begging you to pay attention to the splendor it was providing all around. It smelled like apple, candle, warm and cozy and sweet. And yet, there was a natural freshness to it. He could not only smell the ripe, juicy apples, but he could also smell the earthliness of the leaves as they wavered in the blowing breeze. He could smell the spiciness of the bark that children had been loving, climbing for generations to reach the best apple at the very top of the tree. He could smell the comforting aroma of the old wood and iron boxes provided for people to pile up their harvest in. He stood in the breeze for a moment, simply breathing in the air that was unlike anything he had ever smelled before. When he opened his eyes, Sage was already up in the tree. She had one leg dangling down as she reached to gently pluck a ripe apple from a tall branch. She looked as though she belonged up there. She was practically glowing in the soft autumn sun, her hair billowing around her in that fragrant breeze. Travis watched her for a moment, simply observing her. He was hesitant. Sure, he had climbed fire escapes, but he'd never scaled a tree before. He smiled, and then hauled himself up the branches and sat beside Sage with his heart pounding in the best possible way. She smiled at him with a bit of pride and admiration. "Well, that was my first time climbing a tree," he told her. She smiled and giggled. Though they weren't very high up, it gave them a new, wonderful perspective. They were no longer observers of this nature and this landscape. They were part of it. Travis grabbed an apple. As soon as he bit in, he knew that this wasn't an ordinary apple. It was the sweetest apple he had ever had. They sat up in the tree for quite some time, their legs dangling as they finished their apples, laughing and telling stories the whole time. Travis would catch himself gazing at Sage for a second or two. It was easy to become transfixed on her. The way those green eyes shined, and the way she spoke with her hands, the way she kicked her head back when she laughed, and whenever she caught him staring, her cheeks would flare, and she would blush. Finally, when the apples were finished, the two climbed down the tree. Travis put his hand out, helping her down. When they got to the bottom, they both had excitement about what the rest of the day had in store. Sage took him by the hand again and led him through the farm. They traveled through the fields that were flourishing with ripe vegetables. Around them, large pumpkins clung to their vines. Their orange skin were nearly as bright as the leaves. Travis was in awe as they entered the walking trail in the woods at the edge of the farm. All around them, the forest was ablaze with the colors of fall. Every once in a while, a cool, fresh breeze would blow, and the autumn leaves would come drifting down and down and down. A beautiful rainfall on the planet. Here, they walked mostly in silence. It seemed that the forest around was speaking for them, and the creatures within it. With the cold of winter on the horizon, all the creatures of the forest were busy getting ready to settle down in their cozy dens for a few months. Sage looked over at Travis and caught him staring at her. This time he didn't look away. He kept staring, and she stared back. He very gently touched her face and massaged it with his thumb and palm. As he drew her in closer and bent down and gave her a very subtle and warming kiss. He pulled away and looked at her eyes. They were mahogany brown, nearly the color of the bark coating the trees around her. She giggled and shook her body as if she had the chills. She grabbed his hand and kept walking and walking and walking. "Thank you for showing all this to me, Sage," he muttered. The tone in his voice showed Sage how wonderful and meaningful the experience had meant to him. And she couldn't help but smile because she knew what they were going to find at the end of the path. The overlook. As they emerged to the top of the hill, Travis looked stunned. The path they had been climbing wasn't very steep yet. It wound up on the side of a hill until they were overlooking the entire town. And what they saw was a town straight out of a fairy tale. It seemed every tree in the valley was paintbrushed. It was art. The landscape of coloring trees in vibrant reds and oranges and yellows and browns. It was so warming and comforting. Travis and Sage stood there for what seemed like hours. He took a few pictures. He hadn't taken pictures at all during their travels. He was so mesmerized with Sage. could you not, seeing this incredible view? The moment was sacred. After he took the pictures, he looked at Sage and again said thank you for showing me all this. She smiled. He touched her face again. She didn't pull away one bit. He pulled her in and gently kissed her lips again. She loved it. As she put her hand on his face, rubbing it through his beard, they both pulled away and stared at each other. But not for long, as they started kissing again. Any doubts Travis had about his trip, any doubts he had about his future, no longer existed. All that mattered right now was this new woman who had bumped into him.